Welcome to the NFL show on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. Our show is brought to you by Replenishing Care and Technologies, specifically the PEMF machine. Whether you're young or old, the PEMF machine can help you heal quicker and recover better. My name is Sam Teets. Obviously, I'm without my usual co-host, Mike Goodpasser, today. He's probably watching the Cincinnati Reds game right now. I mean, they're in the playoffs. He doesn't get to see them in the playoffs very often, so he's enjoying that. I think they lost 1-0 in 13 innings yesterday, so he's probably going to be around that game for a while. So he's not here today for that reason. As disappointing as it is, but we're just going to roll on and hope this Cincinnati Reds lose to the Atlanta Braves and see how that goes with them. But we do have some interesting NFL news to talk about today because we'll be previewing Thursday Night Football. We'll talk about how COVID-19 is altering the NFL schedule. And we also have to get through some news from Marlon, Humphrey, and the Baltimore Ravens because their secondaries have been remade. And if we have time, we will also discuss some players who I consider disappointing or have had disappointing first quarters of the season so far. But let's open with the main story of the day. It's the Steelers-Titans game, which was originally scheduled for Sunday, although several Tennessee players tested positive for COVID-19 after last week's game. So they pushed it back. They were deciding between they wanted to do it either on Monday or on Tuesday night. And now it came out this morning that an additional player, I think it's the fifth player for Tennessee Titans has tested positive for COVID-19. So that game is now officially being moved. Well, it's being postponed indefinitely in a sense. It's not being played this weekend. It's not playing early next week. From the sounds of it, the best possibility or the most logical possibility is that they'll play Week 7. Week 7 is Tennessee's projected bye week. So they'll play Week 7. They'll shift Baltimore and Pittsburgh, the game that's supposed to be played Week 7, to Week 8, because both those teams have bye weeks in Week 8. You'll see Tennessee, Pittsburgh, Week 7, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Week 8. And I have a couple of issues with this changing the schedule. And it's not that I don't think COVID-19 is serious. I do. And it's not that I don't want the NFL to predict players. I do. But at the same point, Pittsburgh, I'm a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. So as a diehard fan, I'm upset that they're moving this game because the Steelers had a really good schedule. I mean, a bye week, Week 8, that's smack dab in the middle of the season. That's perfect. We're talking about injuries. It's perfect. We're talking about recovery and just getting set for the second half of the year. So Week 8 bye week is ideal. And I thought it was a perfect situation for Pittsburgh. Now you're going to have a Week 4 bye week. I mean, that's just insane to me because that's so early in the season. You have so many more games left afterwards. 13 games you have to play with nonstop, no rest. And to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't think the NFL – I mean, they're in a tough situation. This is really the only decision they can make if they want to keep their usual dates for the playoffs and things like that. Personally, as I'm a Steelers fan, I would push to do everything in the power to keep Pittsburgh to have that Week 8 bye, even if it meant putting in an extra week of football just to let some games. So I'm sure there will be other games postponed. This probably won't be the only one. We're only 3 weeks in. So I would assume there will be other games this season that's going to be postponed as well. Even if I'm not building in another week of football or regular season football to account for these games that could be pushed back because of COVID-19, I would much rather do that as a Pittsburgh Steelers fan than take a bye week in Week 4 and play out the rest of the year. Because so far, Pittsburgh's been all right. They've been fairly healthy. The offensive line's been banged up to some degree, but usually, for the most part, compared to some teams, they've been healthy. But you do, 13 games in a row, plus playoffs, because I'm assuming we're going to make the playoffs. 3-0 start, first time since the last time they made the Super Bowl and played Green Bay Packers. So they've been really good historically, so when they start 3-0, I would assume that it's going to be at least a playoff team because we got Big Ben back this year. Last season, they just barely missed the playoffs with Mason Rudolph and Devin Hodges at quarterback. So obviously, playoff aspirations are well within reach for Pittsburgh this year. But 13 games in a row, going straight into the playoffs probably, that's harsh. I mean, even for the best teams in the NFL, that would be difficult. And doing it as Pittsburgh, a team that still has a lot of question marks, a team that's had injury issues, maybe not so much this year so far, but definitely in the past. I mean, we have plenty of players who have dealt with injuries. We can talk about James Conner. Juju Smith-Schuster was banged up last year. Ben Roethlisberger coming off a season where he missed basically the entire year. So injuries have been a severe issue with Pittsburgh in the past. You're now asking them to play 13 games in a row. And Mike Tomlin came out and said, we don't care. Well, I mean, yeah, you have to say that because you really don't have another option. I understand Pittsburgh Steelers have a tough mentality. They have a next man up mentality. They've gone through this once last year already. So they can understand how it's like to be in a tricky situation with injuries or just with scheduling difficulties. But 13 games, you can't tell me that the players are not going to care when they hit the final game of the season after they've been playing 13 games in a row. I mean, you can't tell me that that's not going to add a little extra stress and wear on your bodies to the point where you might not be in prime shape come playoffs. So as a Steelers fan, I don't like this move because, again, you're putting Pittsburgh at a huge disadvantage here, and it's not even the Pittsburgh's fault for this situation. It's not Tennessee's fault either because this thing spread so fast. I understand that you can't be expected to prevent it from spreading to at least some members of the team, some members of the staff, because of how large football teams are and how large the staffs are and how easily this thing is spread. But at the same point, no player in the Steelers has tested positive. No players in the Vikings who played the Tennessee Titans last week have tested positive. It's only been Tennessee staff and Tennessee players. And now Pittsburgh, in a sense, is getting punished because it really is a sort of punishment to have a bye week in week 4 and have to basically forfeit your bye week in week 8. They're being punished because Tennessee now is in trouble. And again, it's not Tennessee's fault. It's not the fault of the players or staff necessarily, but it's certainly a Tennessee problem, not a Pittsburgh problem. And now Pittsburgh's getting dragged into the situation. So it's unfortunate we couldn't play. I mean, I would have loved to have a Tuesday night game, honestly, just expand it. And the more nights of football, the better. But after another positive test came back this morning, they have ruled out playing on Monday. They've ruled out playing on Tuesday. They're basically saying, look, you're going to take your bye week this week for both Tennessee and Pittsburgh. And we're just going to push this game back, snatch it back to week 8 or week 7. And again, I'm not in total agreement with this move. I understand. I don't want players playing when there's a possibility they could transmit COVID to other guys. I want the Steelers to stay as healthy as possible. I've definitely emphasized that. So I don't want them playing Tennessee if there's a chance some player might get COVID-19. But it is really frustrating because Pittsburgh's got a 3-0 start. I would have picked Pittsburgh to beat Tennessee this week. I think they're on a hot streak. You want that hot streak to continue too. I would much rather have a bye week after a losing game than have a bye week after winning a game. Because when you've got that power and you get that streak going, it's important to carry that momentum going forward. And Pittsburgh, like I said, 3-0 start. It's the first time they've done this. I believe 2010 was the year when they played the Green Bay Packers in the Super Bowl. So it's the first time in a decade they've done this. And now you're just going to cut it short and basically cut the momentum off entirely because of COVID-19. And again, COVID-19's wrecked all kinds of elements of our society. I mean, I'm at college right now. I'm in my dorm. I've been selected for random mandatory testing 2 in the last 3 days, which is, I mean, it's a little bit crazy. But we're certainly living in a different kind of society right now, so I understand that you have to do things you normally wouldn't to accommodate COVID-19 and all these issues. But at the same point, it's extremely frustrating as a Steelers fan to lose the huge advantage you had of a Week 8 bye, a tremendous schedule, the momentum you have with 3 winning football games in a row. I mean, the best thing that could come out of this is Pittsburgh does have some guys banged up. I know Deontay Johnson got a little banged up last week against Houston. Some guys along the offensive line has some injury issues. So hopefully get all those guys back. And I think they're for the most part minor injuries. I know guys like Zach Banner are done for the year. But get the people with minor injuries, get them back, get them healthy. Maybe fix the secondary. Because the secondary, which was a strong suit at Pittsburgh last year, they've been mediocre at best so far this year. They gave 3 touchdowns to the Houston Texans in the first half last game. Minkah Fitzpatrick's been nowhere to be seen. Terrell Evans has been Terrell Evans. He's average at best. Joe Hayden is looking old. Steven Nelson got inexcusably beat for a touchdown last Sunday. I think Mike Hilton missed the game, I'm pretty sure. Or no, it wasn't Hilton. It was Sutton, I think, missed the game. But we'll get him back probably for week 5. It's just frustrating overall. So we were in a hot streak. We were doing really well. The secondary, though, has been an issue. So hopefully this extra week will give us time to address that. Because Ryan Tannehill, who again will be playing in week 7 now, and just an underrated quarterback. I think so far this year he's probably the 5th or 6th best quarterback in the NFL in terms of how well he's played. And that team coming out of my mouth, that doesn't sound right, but it honestly is. You look at the numbers and look at how Tennessee's performing. He really has been a top 6, top 5 quarterback so far this year. It's not just Derrick Henry. I'm not really worried about Derrick Henry, though, because Pittsburgh has shut down Denver's run game, for the most part, with Melvin Gordon. I know he did get like 70 yards, but he didn't have a breakout game. Saquon Barkley actually shut down entirely. David Johnson in Houston got shut down entirely. So I'm not really worried about containing Derrick Henry. I think he'll get probably 50, 60 yards, maybe 70, because he's just so good. But Pittsburgh has a defensive front to just manhandle Tennessee's offensive line. And we don't know what Taylor Lewan State will be. I know he left the game for Tennessee this past week, so you might have a backup left tackle in place there. Week 7. I keep messing those two up. Come week 7, maybe he'll be healthy again, but we don't know. I'm not worried about Derrick Henry. I'm really worried about what Ryan Tannehill can do in the passing game. I would assume A.J. Brown has been hurt and banged up a little bit early in the year, will be healthy by week 7, and he'll be able to play for them. That gives Tennessee their best receiving option back. I would be a little concerned about that. I'm much more worried about Ryan Tannehill than Derrick Henry. Tennessee's defense is, they're Tennessee's defensive front and defense has always been claimed to be very good. I think it's a little bit of an embellishment. I don't think they're great. I think they're an average, but slightly above average defense. The secondary is, guys like Kevin Byard back there. They have some good players, Malcolm Butler, Adoree Jackson, but at the same point, it's not a star-studded secondary. The linebacking core, it's solid, but it's not fantastic. And the defensive line, and you add Jadeveon Clowney, you have Harold Landry there already, Vic Beasley. It's a good group. Again, not an elite group. And I think they really get hot week to week necessarily. They don't have the constant production that superstar defenses do. This past week, they gave up 30 points to the Minnesota Vikings, and the Vikings almost won the game. And they've been struggling. They've been doing terribly the first 2 weeks. So Tennessee's defense is a little overhyped, in my opinion. I'm not so worried about that matchup. Although Ben has the propensity to throw interceptions sometimes. He's a bit of a gunslinger, so I'm a little concerned about that. I think turnovers could be a big factor in that game, although they really are in every game, we're being honest. But yeah, Pittsburgh, Tennessee, pushed back to week 7. I'm not happy about it. Pittsburgh Steelers fans shouldn't be happy about it, but there's nothing we can really do. This is just how it is. We have to accept that and move forward. Pittsburgh now has a bye week in week 4, which means they get to tune in and watch football on Thursday, Sunday, and Monday, stress-free, and not have to worry about how the Steelers are going to turn out and potentially make the game a close one when they really should be a blowout anyways. But that's really the highlight news of the day. Another thing I just want to throw out here, Marlon Humphrey has signed a significant contract extension with the Baltimore Ravens. I'm pulling it up right now. I don't know where. I wrote it down somewhere, but I don't know where it is. He has signed a 5-year, $98.75 million extension, making him the second highest paid quarterback in the league behind Jalen Ramsey. For those of you who don't know, Ramsey basically signed a 5-year, $100 to $105 million extension with the Los Angeles Rams earlier this year. He became the highest, which is the first contract by a quarterback to ever be worth $100 million. So good market for the quarterback so far this year. Marlon Humphrey is a solid player. He's the first-team All-Pro this past year. But him and Marcus Peters, who's also first-team All-Pro, they're terrific in man coverage usually. We really kind of saw them get exposed against the Kansas City Chiefs this past week. I mean, the Chiefs just torched Baltimore both on offense and on defense. And I think what we saw is that guys like Peters, especially Marcus Peters, by the way, not singling out Marlon Humphrey so much as Marcus Peters, but these guys are susceptible to speed. Tyreek Hill torched Marcus Peters at least once or twice during that game. And Peters has been beat deep with speed in the past. We saw with the Rams, he got beat a couple times. I think Tyler Lockett got him once or twice during his short stint with the Rams. So this is a defense and a secondary susceptible to speed. They don't have Tavon Young as their nickelback. He's not there anymore. He's hurt. Well, he's not. He's there, but he's hurt. So he's not playing. You're down on Marcus Peters, Marlon Humphrey. Those are your 2 star guys. Those are basically the players matching up against the best offensive threats the other teams have. But Marlon Humphrey is significantly faster than Marcus Peters. You look back at the 40 time, he's like a tenth of a second or more than that faster than Peters, which for 40 times is a significant amount. He's got some speed, but again, he's not in the same classification as a prime Richard Sherman, who wasn't even that fast speaking with either, but he's not in the same class as a prime Patrick Peterson or even a prime Stephon Gilmore. He's not in that grouping. And we saw against the Chiefs that Cole Hardman and Tyreek Hill can burn this secondary. They can burn Humphrey. They can burn Peters. And really, that's the biggest issue I think this defense is going to have moving forward. This team's going to have moving forward. It's not so much Lamar Jackson and the inconsistencies he can go through because he still has those moments, even though he's the reigning MVP. We saw that come back to bite them against Kansas City, but I think he'll have it figured out. I think they'll fix that for if they play Kansas City in the playoffs. My issue would be, can Baltimore's defensive backs, without Earl Thomas back there at safety because he's gone now, will this defensive backfield be able to keep up the speed of Tyreek Hill and Cole Hardman, Sammy Watkins, even Travis Kelce? I don't think they can. I mean, they're ordinarily a very good defense. It's a terrific defense on paper. But you're not a defensive unit designed to keep pace with a Tyreek Hill and a Cole Hardman. Very few defenses are built that way to begin with. But certainly not the one in Baltimore. And Kansas City seems to have them figured out, both on offense and defense right now. I would put more money on Lamar Jackson figuring it out and having a much better performance against Kansas City if they meet in the playoffs than this defense finding out a way to deal with Tyreek Hill, Cole Hartman, Sammy Watkins. Because right now, there's a lot of money put into that Baltimore defense. There's a lot of draft picks invested in that defense. And frankly, you don't put that much money in to get as poor a performance as you did against Kansas City out of it. That really is a situation where I think it's not worth the amount of money you're putting in, not worth the investment you put in, when that's all you're going to get in return. So I would be worried if I'm Baltimore. I would hope to God I'm not playing Kansas City again at any point in the playoffs, because the Chiefs are just a terrible matchup for the Ravens. I think the Ravens will bounce back this week. They'll do fine. But Kansas City right now, that's the one team from Baltimore I really don't want to play. Other ones, New England, Tennessee, those are probably not the best match. They're probably not the best matchups for Baltimore either. But I think they can prevail against those teams. Kansas City, on the other hand, that's the one team I would take over Baltimore 10 times out of 10. So I think Kansas City, best team in the AFC. We went through this yesterday when we did the Grueling Truth NFL show. We talked about the league power rankings, team power rankings for the year. Kansas City is number 1. I think Baltimore has an argument for being number 2 despite getting blown out basically against Kansas City. But there's definitely levels to this. I mean, Kansas City is just a very bad matchup for Baltimore. I do hope they meet in the playoffs because that would really give me a chance to see coaching-wise what changes. But for now, we just are left with the fact that Kansas City completely dominated Baltimore this past week. All right, that's really it for the NFL news section of the show. So now we're going to preview this terrible Thursday night football game. And really, I don't know why we even bother with Thursday nights anymore, because I think what was last week's game? Was that the Miami-Jacksonville game? Why are we watching these? I mean, Miami-Jacksonville, realistically, they're not playoff teams. Neither is the Jets versus the Broncos. These are not playoff caliber teams. These are not even good franchises. It's not great football to watch. Now, granted, Ryan Fitzpatrick played well this past week, but I mean, realistically, do you really want to see these teams play Thursday Night Football? Do you really want to spend 2.5 to 3.5 hours watching this game? I really don't. I'm hoping it's over by halftime, but between these two teams, I mean, this is going to be a lot, I think, like the Cincinnati-Philadelphia game, and the narrative being that, wow, these two teams are so bad that neither one of them is going to go out and actually win the football game. It's going to come down to the wire because they're so terrible, neither one could capitalize on mistakes of the other team. I really think that's where we're headed with this game, because this has been, I mean, let's talk about Jets-Broncos. They're both 0-3. The Broncos are on their third-string quarterback, Drew Lock. He's hurt again. He was hurt at this one point as during his rookie season as well, which is part of the reason we only saw him for a couple of games. They've just benched Jeff Driscoll. They're on to Brett Rippett. They're starting him against Sam Darnold. Jeff Darnold, who threw 2 pick-sixes this past week, against the Indianapolis Colts. So what a quarterback matchup we have for tonight's game. These are two of the worst franchises in football. It's honestly probably going to be a horrible game. It's probably these two teams and the New York Giants. They're the worst teams in the NFL right now. And I really don't think it's close. I know there are probably other teams that have had bad starts, but I think these three are definitely the worst. It's a shame because Sam Darnold is not a bad quarterback. All right, coming out of USC, he was a very good prospect. I had him and Baker Mayfield as the top 2 prospects in quarterback in that draft. And the Jets have ruined Sam Darnold in a way that the Browns have not necessarily ruined Baker Mayfield. Granted, he's had terrible coaching. He's never had consistency at the coaching position. But he's had great weapons. Darnold has not had great weapons. Darnold's never had great coaching. And we're looking at a chess match between two of the NFL's probably soon-to-be fired coaches in Vic Fangio and Adam Gase tonight. If this goes to the point where it's a blowout game against the Denver Broncos, say Denver wins, 35-14, Adam Gase needs to be fired by Friday morning because he's been nothing but a failure in New York so far. He really is. It's been a terrible team. The front office has been terrible. They have not built something around Sam Darnold at all. They've tried to add pieces. And when they add those pieces like Le'Veon Bell or C.J. Mosley linebacker, they either get hurt or they're away from the team. Le'Veon Bell's hurt this year when it was supposed to be a rebound year. C.J. Mosley completely opted out of the season after playing 2 games this past year. And then they go out and draft someone like Mekhi Becton, who's a decent player. He's got the physical build to carry himself well in the NFL, but he has none of the technique. You draft Denzel Mims. Denzel Mims gets pushed around by defensive backs at the point of catch. He was not the best wide receiver available at the time the Jets took him. And it's a situation where you just have a terrible organization. Your scouting's been bad. Your drafting's been bad. Your free agent signings and contracts have been bad. Your ownership is bad. The New York Jets are one of the worst franchises in the NFL right now. And they're trending towards the direction of Detroit Lion territory, Cleveland Brown territory. They're headed that way. Washington territory. They're headed towards that group because they had some success at the beginning of the 2010s. They did. But we're well removed from that at this point. And I know last year they were kind of in the middle of the pack that maybe could have made the playoffs, just had a better start to the year and had Sam Darnold the entire season. And yet they somehow added pieces this offseason and got worse as a football team. And that to me just says you have not been able to build a cohesive unit as a team, and you have not been able to develop your young players like a Sam Darnold. And Darnold is still a quality football player who I believe could be a starter in the NFL for the next 10 years if he gets out of New York very soon. If he spends 5 years in New York, which I don't think he will, they'll probably decline his fifth-year option. He'll probably be there 4 years. If he's there 4 years, it might be too late to salvage his career. But let me put it this way. The step that Josh Allen took this year between being a below-average quarterback to a borderline elite QB at this point, the step that Allen took was what I projected Darnold to do and what I really thought Darnold should do. The issue has been coaching, like Adam Gase. It's been personnel issues. The offensive line's terrible. Your running back is Frank Gore. Frank Gore is very old. Frank Gore should not be a starting running back in the NFL. As much as I love him, I think he's a future Hall of Fame player. Frank Gore should not be a starting running back in the NFL. Yeah, he is on the New York Jets because the Jets have not been able to build a roster. They have not been able to put personnel around Sam Darnold. And their best receivers, guys like Jamison Crowder and Rashad Perriman, who shouldn't be your best wide receivers to begin with, and you are building a competitive offense, those guys have been hurt. You don't have offensive personnel put around Sam Darnold to make this young guy succeed. That's my Jets rant. I mean, the Jets are just, it's so bad. I think you could see either team win this game. Just honestly a close matchup. It's hard to pick because both organizations are so bad right now. And Vic Fangio on the other sideline, I think he should be fired after the year. I understand this is only the second season, I believe, for both Fangio and Gase as head coaches, and they both have young quarterbacks in Sam Darnold and Drew Lock who have battled injuries and other things like that in the first couple of years of their careers. But what I've seen from Fangio so far has been nothing, absolutely nothing to make me consider the fact that he could maximize potential or roster that has talent on it to win football games. You have guys like Jared Juvie, KJ Hamler, who could be difference makers. Philip Lindsay's there, though he might not play tonight. I heard his timing is doubtful for tonight's game. You got Melvin Gordon, you got Royce Freeman there. You have pieces in Denver to be a successful football team. I really think Denver's a quarterback away from being a 8 to 10 win football team. They really had the pieces this year. And injuries have kind of ruined it. Injuries, of course, Von Miller kicked off the year. It basically signaled that the Denver Broncos were just headed straight down. And it's really where they've ended up. They're 0-3. Vic Fangio should be fired after this year. I understand it's only been 2 seasons, and I'm not the kind of guy who supports, quick trigger fires, quick trigger hires necessarily. But you can see and you can tell from watching football what coaches have it at this point, what coaches don't. And there are coaches that certainly have it. Whatever it is, they consistently have their teams winning at least 8 games a year, even in their down years, like Tomlin, John Harbaugh. I mean, Doug Pearson's, the Eagles have been terrible this year, don't get me wrong, but they won what? I mean, they played the playoffs last year, but like Greg Wirtz, their top receiving option. And the offensive line that year was banged up too. So there are some coaches that put together squads that even when they're banged up their injuries are still competing for the playoffs. And there are some coaches that when they're healthy, your team, for some reason, is still finding ways to lose. And when they're banged up, they're worse. So Vic Fangio, Adam Gase, guys like Zach Taylor in Cincinnati to me, these are all Matt Patricia in Detroit, Dan Quinn now in Atlanta. These are all guys who are going to be fired after this year, or should be fired after this year. And I think we could see a situation where 7 or 8 head coaches could be fired after this year. I think Mike Zimmer, if the Vikings keep losing, I know he got an extension recently, but if the Vikings keep losing and they end up winning 3 or 4 games this year, I think you have to fire him because he's had a lot of chances and he's had a lot of good teams. And he hasn't been able to win games. So I think we could see a situation where plenty of teams are fired this year, or plenty of coaches are fired this year. But at the top of the list, obviously, Zach Taylor, Adam Gase, Vic Fangio. Those 3, in my opinion, have to be gone. And I know I said I previewed this game. I really haven't previewed this game. I've really just been ranting about how bad these teams are. But that's really the preview of the game. It's basically going to be how bad are these 2 teams going to play. Because Denver's on the third-string quarterback. Sam Darnold threw 3 picks last week and 2 pick sixes. And Xavier Rhodes, who had a terrible year in Minnesota, cashed, and I think he got 2 of those picks. And that tells you really the point that they're not playing at a competitive level. They're playing at a high level. Both teams have pieces. I think the Broncos are definitely the more talented team, both on offense and defense. So if I had to pick a winner, I would say Denver's going to be the winner. And I think Fangio is a little bit better of a head coach, too, than Adam Gase. I don't think it's a huge difference, honestly, between those two. I don't think it's a significant difference because I think they're both poor. But he's a little better. The defense is a little better in Denver. They have more star players. They have a running game. They have Melvin Gordon, which is something I don't think New York will have. And they've got enough pieces that I think Denver has to be a clear favorite over the Jets here for me. I'll take the Denver Broncos to win this game. But I've been wrong, I'm pretty sure, on both of the last Thursday night football games that happened, I think. So I wouldn't take my word for it. But that's really my preview of the Thursday night game. And we're going to wrap this show up. I'll try. Maybe I'll go in our 10 minutes here. I only have 4 viewers, but we'll go in our 10 minutes. I'll talk about some of the most disappointing players from the current season. These are guys who I thought, or we all thought, do much better than they have so far this year. It's not necessarily all their faults. Their teams and their organizations have been a little up and down as well. But these players certainly have not helped themselves in what they've been able to achieve throughout the year. Kirk Cousins, to me, is one of the most disappointing players from this season. Now, granted, he had a little bit of a bounce-back game this past week against Tennessee. But his stat line right now is he's completing 59% of his pass attempts. That's after completing 69% in 2019 and 70% in 2018. So he's been one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the NFL, actually going back by 5 or 6 years at this point. Well, he's completing less than 60% of his pass attempts. He has 623 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. He threw 6 interceptions all of last year. He already has 6 through 3 games. And part of this has been the offense they've been running. I think they have a new OC in there. They've been trying to change things up a little bit. He's not really playing to his strengths. You could put this on coaching, but also this is on execution as well. You cannot throw 6 picks in your first 3 games, especially because this is so different from what we've seen from him in the past. You can only be disappointed. You really have no one else to blame but the organization and the player at this point. They have to be tied together, I think, because this is not a situation where just the coaching itself has gone awry. Kirk Cousins has been bad. And Kirk Cousins is a guy when he's at his peak is probably a top 12 quarterback, top 13 quarterback in the NFL. But he's just been horrible this year so far. And so have the Minnesota Vikings, which could lead to Mike Zimmer getting fired at the end of the year. Another quarterback. There have been a lot of quarterbacks, by the way, I've been disappointed in this year. So I'm just going to let you know there are 5 or 6 of them. Philip Rivers. Now, Philip Rivers is actually leading the NFL, completing 78.3% of his pass attempts, which sounds good. Except he's been limiting the number of pass attempts he has per game. Or Indianapolis Colts have been limiting the number. Because when he came out, we went through 46 times. They lost to Jacksonville. This is not a quarterback you can throw the ball with 30 to 40 times a game anymore and win football games. If you're the Colts, you have to run 30 to 40 times a game and throw 20 to 25. Because Philip Rivers is at the point in his career where he's no longer an elite quarterback and he's no longer a viable starter who will compete at a high level by himself and carry teams. That's not going to happen. He is at a point where he is degrading. I think we can see that. And he's probably not going to be in the NFL if he decides to leave Indianapolis after this year. I forget if he's a 1 or 2 year deal with the Colts, but he's no longer a qualified starter on a championship team, in my opinion. It would be very difficult for him to lead the Colts anywhere just because you can't ask him to throw 30 or 40 times a game because you will lose that game. Speaking of someone you don't want throwing 30 or 40 times a game, how about Carson Wentz? They really have no choice but to throw 30 or 40 times a game. Everything else on that team, the offensive line, it's been so bad. You have to throw a lot to try to win those games, but he's thrown 6 interceptions as well. And in each of the past 3 years, 2017, 2018, 2019, he only threw 7 interceptions each of those years. And he's already thrown 6 this year, just 3 touchdowns, completing under 60% of his pass attempts as well. The Eagles, I don't know what's going on with the Eagles. I know the offensive line's been banged up. I know the wide receiver core has been banged up. I know Dallas Goedert, he's going on the short and IR, I think 3 weeks. So you're missing a lot of your receiving options. But I don't think that's a good excuse for Carson Wentz because we saw him carry a team with limited no receiving options last year to the playoffs. Granted, the offensive line's been much worse this year, but he's still playing terribly. He's making a lot of bad throws. It's not just the numbers. If you watch him play against Cincinnati, he made throws in double, triple coverage that just should not have been made. These are rookie-level mistakes he's making right now. And I don't know if it's because his confidence is shattered or what's going on, but Carson Wentz right now has been a massive disappointment. And it's, like I said, it's not just the numbers. It's not just him playing with the bad teammates, or not bad teams per se, but low-level players. It's just that he's been making really bad decisions. And then Deshaun Watson. I'm from Clemson. I go to Clemson. And I'm a huge Deshaun Watson fan. I think at his peak, he'll be an elite quarterback. He'll be potentially a top 5 QB. But the Houston Texans are 0-3 right now. While Deshaun is completing over 67% of his pass attempts, he has 4 touchdowns, but he has 3 interceptions. That's the one thing I think he needs to cut down. He had 12 interceptions last year. If he wants to be a truly elite QB, he needs to cut down the interception totals. He already has 3 this year, which is not very good to start. Which is not a very good start to the year. However, if I'm going to write off anyone on this list as not being at fault for their current situation, it would be Deshaun Watson, because Bill O'Brien's at fault for most of this decision because they have not built a good offensive line. They have overpaid Laramie Tunsil. They traded DeAndre Hopkins, a top 3 receiver who is now thriving in Arizona, for David Johnson, a running back who was clearly washed up and hadn't played well for 2 or 3 years. And didn't even get a first-round pick along with that to draft a sure number 1 threat. So I think Deshaun Watson, it's a disappointing season for him and the Houston Texans so far. It's not Deshaun's fault, but I have to call it like it is. It's a disappointing year for the former national champion. Sam Darnold could be in that category, but we already talked about him quite a bit. Mitchell Trubisky, I mean, this is really even a surprise. I mean, you could throw him, Dwayne Haskins in here. I mean, these just are not good quarterbacks. These 2 are just not good QBs. They're not NFL starters. And it's clear that they struggle making even some of the basic throws that most quarterbacks should be asked to make at the NFL level. And Trubisky, it's also a mental game. Trubisky's been mentally pushed around at points throughout his career. And we're seeing that he's crumbling now, and especially because Nick Foles came into the Atlanta game and led the comeback. 3 touchdowns in the 4th quarter, I believe, to beat the Atlanta Falcons. You were never going to get that from Mitchell Trubisky. And that's really what separates qualified quarterbacks, even someone like Nick Foles, from Mitchell Trubisky, is that they will be able to take advantage of what defenses give them and make all the throws you have to make. Trubisky, Haskins, those guys cannot make those kind of throws. And I guess we'll just cover one more position here because I don't really want to go on too much longer. We're over 30 minutes already. But Joe Mixon. And Joe Mixon is not at fault here for most of the shortcomings he's faced so far. I would blame this almost all the time on the Bengals coaching and Bengals offensive line. We saw Mixon average over 100 yards rushing per game through the final 8 weeks of last season. This offensive line is just terrible, though. The offensive line has not helped him at all. It hasn't helped Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow's taking so many hits a game. He'll get hurt at some point just because the offensive line is so bad. And Mixon through 3 games, he's averaging over 50 rushing yards per game. I can't blame him. He did sign a really big contract recently, so you'd expect more from him, but I can't entirely blame Joe Mixon because it really has been a situation in Cincinnati where the offensive line, the coaching, and play calling have all gelled together to create a horrible mishmash that is hurting the production of guys like Joe Burrow and Joe Mixon. But I'm seeing that our viewership has dropped off almost entirely. So I'm going to end the show here, guys. Remember, check out Replenishing Care and Technologies, the PEMF machine. If you're old or young, they'll help you recover faster. So please check out our sponsor. Remember, you can check out thegruelingtruth.com for all of our latest articles. Check out the Grueling Truth Facebook page for all our live streams and all our shows there that just should be there. Please drop a like, leave a comment. We appreciate any kind of interaction you can give us. But for now, you've been listening to and watching The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.